Joining me now to react, Ron Dermer, the Israeli ambassador to the United States. Ambassador, thank you for being here tonight.
Good to be with you, Sandra.
We're hearing from you, one of the first reactions from you to the Secretary of State's speech today. It was a long speech. He was clearly showing his frustrations. We've heard Benjamin Netanyahu respond. John Kerry lashing out at the so-called settler agenda. Your response?
Well, look, first of all, this is not new. I've been in this capacity as ambassador for over 3 years. Before that, I was the senior advisor to the Prime Minister. And so we've been working with this administration for the last 8 years. And in 2009, we had a crisis over the whole question of settlements. So this has nothing to do with this or that Israeli coalition or what has happened over the last 8 years, or even Netanyahu himself. This administration, President Barack Obama, came into office thinking that the whole reason why we don't have peace with the Palestinians is because of the question of settlements. I remember we had just finished this war in Gaza, where we had thousands of rockets that landed on our heads, and that was a few years after we had withdrawn from Gaza and uprooted, not frozen, uprooted 21 settlements. And all of a sudden, in the early days of the administration, as the Prime Minister came to Washington, this became the be-all and end-all. You have to do something on the issue of the settlements. And guess what the Prime Minister did? He did a freeze. And what happened? The Palestinians stayed out of negotiations. So this is not a new story. This is not the building up of all sorts of years and some new policy. It was deeply disappointing that this administration, in its waning days, laid the blame for the failure to achieve peace at Israel. Just one other point. This was a 72-minute speech, and yet they did not discuss that Israel made a sweeping peace offer in 2000 that was met by a Palestinian rejection and a wave of terrorism that claimed 1,000 Israeli lives. They did not mention that in 2008, another Israeli prime minister made a sweeping peace offer that was also rejected by the Palestinians. The reason why we don't have peace is because the Palestinians have rejected the state of the Jewish people in any boundary. And until we deal with the root of the conflict, we're never going to be able to advance peace. And I hope this is the closing chapter of the wrong approach to peace, and that soon we will open a new chapter where we can finally take the right road to peace, because we in Israel want it more than anyone, even the American Secretary of State.
When you talk about that new chapter, clearly you are already developing and have developed a relationship with the incoming Trump administration. What does the Israeli-United States relationship look like under the Trump administration?
Well, first of all, I don't think that this is a battle between Israel and the United States. We were very heartened that President-elect Trump was against this move at the UN Security Council, that he wants to work closely with Israel moving forward to strengthen this alliance. And we were also heartened by the fact that leading senators from both parties, Republicans and Democrats alike, oppose this resolution. So I don't think this is an issue that we have with the United States of America, our most important ally in the world, that we share values and interests and a common destiny. We're fighting the same enemies, and we have the same goals. And I believe with the new administration, with bipartisan support in Congress, we will work to advance peace and security. I do not think there'll be daylight between the U.S. and Israel, and we look forward to having that conversation and seeing what we can do to reverse this resolution, mitigate its dangers, and get about the business of actually advancing peace, which hasn't happened for the last 8 years. Not because of Israel, because we haven't had a Palestinian leadership that wants to make peace, and unfortunately, a U.S. administration that has blamed the wrong party for the failure to advance peace.
And I want to get to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's reaction to the speech, because he really ripped into it, saying, quote, it was skewed against Israel. He said it obsessively dealt with settlements, barely touched upon the root of the conflict, which he described as Palestinian opposition to a Jewish state in any boundaries. And we actually had our brain room dig into this speech, Ambassador, finding that Iran was mentioned once, Hezbollah was mentioned once, Hamas was mentioned 4 times, terrorism 7 times, occupation 13 times, settlements 26 times, to the point of your Prime Minister.
Well, obviously, that was just a continuation of the policy for many years and this obsessive focus on the settlements. I'll tell you one thing that bothered me more than anything else of the speech. I heard the Secretary of State go after this coalition as being the most right-wing coalition in Israel's history, and this is the reason why we don't have peace. There is another coalition, and it's a coalition of the Palestinian Authority with Hamas, which is a terror organization that is openly committed to Israel's destruction and whose charter calls for the murder of Jews worldwide. You would think in a 72-minute speech, the Secretary of State might have mentioned that as being one of the reasons why we don't have peace. Or the fact that you have a Palestinian Authority that glorifies violence and terrorism. He touched on that with a couple of sentences in 72 minutes, but that raises children from a very young age to hate Israel, to hate Jews, glorifies mass murderers, names public squares after them. This is the reason why we don't have peace. The refusal to recognize the right of the Jewish people to have a state in our ancestral homeland, and the failure to educate the new generation for peace.
I want to get to a couple more reactions here, because U.S. Senator Chuck Schumer, a leading Democrat in this country, has responded just recently, a few moments ago, putting out, while Secretary Kerry mentioned Gaza in his speech, he seems to have forgotten the history of the settlements in Gaza, where the Israeli government forced settlers to withdraw from all settlements, and the Palestinians responded by sending rockets from Gaza into Israel. While he may not have intended it, I fear Secretary Kerry, in his speech and action at the UN, has emboldened extremists on both sides. Ambassador.
Well, listen, the extremists on the Palestinian side are terrorists, and they're in the government. When we have any act of terror in Israel, all our political, religious leaders, national leaders, we condemn it. We turn those terrorists into pariahs. We don't name public squares after mass murderers. So I wouldn't draw any moral equivalence, but I want to thank Senator Schumer. I want to thank him for his strong stance in coming out against this, in basically calling on President Obama to veto this resolution. And he's exactly right in terms of what happened in Gaza. We did exactly what the world says that we should do now. We withdrew to the 67 borders. We didn't freeze settlements. We uprooted all of those settlements. And we were hoping to achieve peace. And instead, we got thousands of rockets on our cities. Now, that is just not some chapter in a book that takes place in some foreign country. This is the reality that Israelis live day after day. We are responsible for the consequences of decisions that are made elsewhere. And that shouldn't be the case.
And Ambassador,
as the Prime Minister, just one last point I can add. The Prime Minister said it today, and it's important, because it's, I think, one thing that most infuriates the Israeli people. We are a sovereign nation. We have to make the tough choices that affect our own security and our own lives. We want peace more than anyone else in the world, because it's our children who go into battle to defend our country. And we would like to see that day come when we can live in peace with all our neighbors. So it's not going to happen from a speech in Washington. It's not going to happen from a vote in New York. It's not going to happen between a conference in Paris. Let the Israeli people decide their own future. We are a sovereign nation. Respect the democratic will of the Israeli voters to make the choices necessary for our future and our children's future. We're the ones who have the most skin in the game. We're the ones who most want peace.
That being said, Ambassador, you as well as the Prime Minister have charged the Obama administration with being behind the push for this resolution. By the way, do you still support that idea?
Absolutely.
And right now, a top Obama aide is suggesting that you are putting that out there, and that the Prime Minister is putting that out there as merely a distraction. That's the Deputy National Security Advisor, Ben Rhodes, is now saying that. If you have the evidence, which we are told you have ironclad evidence, why not turn it over right now? Reveal this to your people. Reveal this to the American people.
Well, I'm not the master of fiction. Ben Rhodes is. I can tell you we will present that evidence to the new administration through the appropriate channels. It's sensitive information. I think a new administration will take a look at it. And there's just no question about it. When a Prime Minister of Israel goes on international television and says he has clear evidence, believe me, he's got clear evidence. I've never even heard him make such a claim. I know 100% that the Prime Minister is right. We will give it to the new administration, and they can decide whether or not they want to show it or choose to share it with the American people.
Ambassador Dermer, thank you for coming on.